Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And yeah, 2022's just started, and already it feels like I'm a little behind schedule. Not by much, but some real life stuff delayed this from coming out until I put out a couple solo reviews. And even then, I got a meaty docket for the next episode that's coming. So alright, let's not waste any time. For 2022, let's get on the pulse. So before we go any further, if you would like to like and subscribe, I would be extremely grateful. Happy to help build the channel here. But now into the matter at hand, we got 6 projects on the docket. Let's start off with, from Chris Phoenix, The World of Chris Phoenix.
Glitters is gold. The man smiling 24/7 needs to be consoled. Story as old as every tale that's been told. Feeling adequate cause I'm not as outgoing. Look at him, he's so social, energy is glowing.
You know, I always warn new patrons who put albums on my schedule about the risk that comes with it, but the Seattle rapper in question did say he was fine with me going through his debut album, and you know, there are things I can appreciate about this. The production overall is actually pretty decent, cleanly balanced with a solid enough melodic sensibility with the dreary keys and drums that add to some rougher, clattering presence that doesn't overpower the mix, but also doesn't cleanly fit into a trap or a boom bap sound. For an indie rap project, I appreciate that it's mostly trying to do its own thing, like on the horn-inflected Life of the Proletariat, or the more metallic, percussive Star-Spangled Bullets, melodic trap excursion on What the World Wants to Be, and the more defined, guitar-driven pop-rap love song of Tonight. Those are the exceptions. And you know, I like a lot of the ideas that Chris Phoenix is exploring here. The album has a pretty direct political slant in speaking against capitalism, US imperialism, a broken medical system, the glorification of violence, and even food deserts in black neighborhoods. Might be kind of blunt in the messaging, but more often than not, it's on the right track. It's effective. There's some evocative imagery. And I really wish that Chris Phoenix could sell any of this. I'm a little bit reminded of Moneybagg Yo or Gucci Mane in the mostly flat vocal timbre and really bad habit to slip off beat and let the words pile up. And yeah, that's more excusable for a guy who's trying to present some higher concept ideas that don't connect together or rhyme all that easily, but he's fumbling the execution with a lack of expressive performance, flows that feel increasingly clunky, and don't even get me started on whenever he tries the auto-tune or the pitch shifting, because it doesn't work. It's also a weirdly short project. 2 interludes, 8 songs, clocking under a half hour, and that leaves you feeling that it could be missing something a little deeper. Not in the politics, but in how I don't really get a lot of deeper insight into who Chris Phoenix is outside of gestures towards introspection and depression, coaxed through a lot of overthinking and a natural conflict with his religious upbringing. And that kind of frustrates me, because this has the feel of an academically minded album. It's got some solid ideas and some polish around them, certainly playing to more of a low-key vibe, but also you can tell he doesn't quite think the performance is as important because the ideas are so compelling. And that might work in a university classroom, but it doesn't really work on stage, where caring about the person delivering the ideas helps them stand out. And the slapdash rapping and the weak performance is going to keep me from coming back to this. A lot of the details, they're right on the money. There's a lot to like here, just the core needs a lot of work. Not bad, but I'm probably not going to go back to it much. Next up from Vale-Smith, Coruscate. Alright, here's an electronic project from this UK producer, started seeing a breakout his past couple of years for his wonky dabblings with trap, glitch, and future bass. And I gotta say, going back through his previous projects, I liked a decent bit of what I had heard. Choppy samples ricocheting off the textured grooves and the cascading percussion, but the mixes are so well balanced and mastered in their integration of more organic tones that they show a lot more layered complexity than outright instability, even in some of the kookier moments. Now, his 2020 album took the collage of echoing vocal samples, strings, and increasingly off-kilter percussion into even stranger, but yet oddly accessible and intriguing territories. And now for Coruscate, well, it's kind of interesting. Overall, the palette of burbling and glittering synths and fluttery woodwinds, they feel cooler and more relaxed this time, leaning slightly away from the warmer and wilder organic arrangements for something that feels smoother, more liquid in order to complement complement the jittery glitch and the breezier UK garage clatters of percussion, where the future bass and even some dubstep influences on the low end, it's more pronounced than ever before, especially as individual tracks remain as shuddering, gurgling, and spasmodic as ever. Well, okay, outside of the chirpy acoustics on Setting Sun, and that Springs reprise slipping back in for the closing track on Hummingbird. Nice little callback there, I did appreciate that. And you know, while I could nitpick here and say that the bass can feel a little swampier than you might expect, the production is still remarkably smooth and the album flows incredibly well. And that might be a bit of a mixed blessing. With Are You Sick of Being Unlucky, there was a feel of a loose arc to the album, a project that seemed to be constantly daring itself to push out of its comfort zone, whereas Coruscate kinda locks into its warping, wonky tones and doesn't quite modulate or melodically climax as strongly. It all just kinda washes over you as a result. So are there standout moments? Well, yes, a few. The clanking, grainy dubstep that brushed against the trap on Ace Ransom. I really like how the incredibly smooth vibe of Revealing Light gets a little bit more distorted the more vibrant it gets, with hints of almost like an object sound. And there was almost traces of city pop vibe in the melody of everything, and I appreciated how the song kind of decomposed itself. But outside of those, you know, if you can get into the right headspace to appreciate some of the smoothest glitch in UK garage that also happens to bend into some interesting directions and territory, this is a solid enough listen. So yeah, it's a recommendation. Give this a shot. Next up from Wilderun, Epigone. So when I covered Wilderun last time, it was on one of the very earliest episodes of On the Pulse, and I'll admit I didn't quite have as long to sit with the album as I would have liked. So maybe I would have to come around to appreciate more of the whiplash transitions, opulent production, and the occasional hook amidst all the deconstructive splendor. Unfortunately, in recent years, it has wound up an impressive album that I respect a little bit more than I'll outright endorse, and not one that I revisit all that much, but hey, it dropped at the end of the damn year, and now with the new Wilderun record, I have more time and patience to drill into it properly. And yet, I don't know. This was an album where Wilderun took their grandiose ambitions into territory where I'm not sure the payoff for the experimentation was quite as robust as they might have hoped. For one, the pacing is considerably wonkier, not just in the folk-inflected acoustic slow start with some admittedly gorgeous strings, but also shows a sign of the lingering Opeth influence that we probably could have done without at this point. But with the return of all the whiplash transitions, the project kind of has a hard time building and maintaining a sense of momentum. And that's before you factor in some of the ear-splitting synths and noise frequencies that don't remotely fit with this style of prog metal, or the go-nowhere ambient passages that don't fit. But what might be more frustrating with Epigone is that for as many of the opulent arranged passages saturated with symphonic horns and their pair with shredding and some legit great solos and the manic drum work as the album steadily builds towards a sizzling black metal-esque final instrumental, I gotta say it, the songs don't quite seem to have the same melodic motifs that provided some underlying hooks and structures to Veil of Imagination at its most epic. And minus those good transitions, it leaves many of these very extended pieces feeling kinda piecemeal and again, lacking momentum. Maybe some of it has to do with Evan Anderson Barry's vocals sounding a little bit more clean and languid in the mix overall, not quite bringing as much intensity this time. Maybe it has to do with the album diving straight into abstract meta-commentary in its lyrics, all about the fleeting, stormy clouds of the creation process, following up greatness and the steep cost that it can force on creators and artists to transcend the human form, and how quickly it can all slip away, where transcendence and truth are both barely grasped, but could well be tainted by the human translation. All of which kind of leaves me with the impression of an album that's constantly yanking its thesis out of view. You want to get to it, but it's always out of reach. Couple that with the sprawl that could very well be translated as bloat. Look, I mean, on a textural and compositional level, it's impressive, but it does feel like a step back for me, and while it's decent, it doesn't quite grab me as much. It's still good, not quite great this time though. Just saying. Next up from Fickle Friends, Are We Gonna Be Alright?
Talking to you instead. The only thing that I refuse to forget is when you said I was the fucking best.
had more concerns about this project than I expected I would, especially as Fickle Friends still haven't really won me over as a group, given their hooky tendencies tend to be struggling against a lot of rough production and out-of-nowhere stylistic swerves, especially on those last 2 EPs. But hey, they packaged a song or two from those EPs onto the new album, and oh boy, this is a mess. And what's kind of odd is that while the EPs seem to be kind of grasping for a little bit more soft focus refinement, this album seems to be a swing back into the chunkier, guitar-driven pop rock new wave sound, where you recognize enough of the influences to have the sound feel familiar, but also with the niggling feeling that it's not quite working, mostly due to questionable production that still can't flatter frontwoman Natasha Shiner's thinner vocal lead. The band has cited Prince as an influence, and while you definitely get snippets of that on cuts like Glow, this is also not a band that's remotely tight enough in their grooves to be convincing with that lane. Reminding me a lot more of the generally forgotten slick teen pop rock from around 1988 to 1992 that got stuck in the shadows of Prince and Madonna and George Michael, and that grunge did a thorough job obliterating until we get a song like Yeah 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 that sounds like a good garbage song from the 90s, really reminding me way more that Emma Blackery had a far better grasp of some of those darker pivots and textures. But that's also where this really snapped into focus. Yeah, Emma Blackery is playing more to 2000s pop rock, but her voice and her presence is way more cutting than, frankly, anything Fickle Friends has ever put on record. So whenever the guitars pick up more sizzling presence but not groove or foundation, they clash with the cleaner vocals that can't command the muddy mix when the percussion feels stiff and the bass lines feel underpowered. And you know, it's a damn shame, because I do think this band can write some pretty good melodic hooks. And even if I still think the lyrics are pretty thin and interchangeable, a lot of hallmarks of the lonely, claustrophobic Pandemic album are all over the flimsy relationship and party songs here, but I can hear enough catharsis being reached that I kinda get how this might work for a younger target audience. But there is a part of me that hears this album and is really reminded of when Pale Waves jumped from synthpop to 2000s pop rock last year without addressing the underlying cracks that would be exposed by their stylistic shift. And while this is nowhere near as bad as that was, mostly because I really can't think of that many acts going for this sound or territory, I also can't really say it's that good. A couple decent songs, I'd probably wind up skipping the rest. Next up from the Wombats, Fix Yourself, Not the World. My god, I was worried about this one. Yeah, I've been a fan of the Wombats for over a decade now, and I think A Guide to Love, Loss, and Desperation and Glitterbug are both great records. But the 2018 album felt like a step back, paradoxically because the band was growing up, embracing a more of a melancholic, classy, retro post-punk sound that didn't quite flatter their strengths. But you know what? Some of that is to be expected as a band matures and grows up. Even more so when you can tell the band is embracing some broader Parquet Quartz-esque tendencies going into this new album. And you know, maybe Beautiful People Will Ruin Your Life, it was just transitional. They would recapture that magic again. Hell, they're still good live when I've seen them. Well, the thing with this album is that while Parquet Quartz is now a parallel thanks to the sharper focus on the flashy post-punk grooves, the Wombats actually seem to be pulling from a bit of a broader palette this time around. Some of it the more commercial, mid-2010s indie textures that I don't really like, especially in some backing vocals and percussion, then a smattering of some electronically enhanced dance punk, not really close to matching the manic fun of their debut, even if I'm not really expecting it anymore. It's got more of an LCD sound system influence, which I'm not exactly a fan of either. But more than ever, the blown-out, guitar-driven riffage, you would have heard this in Britpop out of the mid to late 90s. Now, on the one hand, going for the stadium-sized riffs is yet another step away from the manic humor of their earliest work, or the kinetic, wild abandon of Glitterbug, and without that brighter splash of melody, you can make the argument that the undercurrent of darkness with the Wombats, it's even more prominent and dragging them into a lot bleaker territory than normal, especially with Matthew Murphy's more lethargic vocals, and especially that falsetto, which I don't really care for. And it's not like the lyrics were already going to take them to that spot. They're normally pretty dark content. So much of the lyrical content this time around is a retreat into this sour, deflective irony, because how much can they really change the world around them when they're so much of a mess as it is? Maybe Gen X was right to embrace that irony, but I gotta be honest, this is an attitude that sours more than a few songs on this album for me, especially for a band that used to be so recklessly earnest. It might be more pragmatic or smarter to make songs like Everything I Love Is Going to Die, or the anti-social media track Work Is Easy, Life Is Hard, or the flagrant commercial core of Don't Poke the Bear, but I'm sorry, it's defeatist. I still remember the Wombats with that careening, reckless flavor that was so much fun. But on the other hand, if there is a band that will at least try for some of those overblown moments and real bombast, it is the Wombats. And in between the slow build of Method to the Madness that actually wound up growing on me since I reviewed it back on my IGTV, or the terrific grooves and the hooks on This Car Drives all by itself, People Don't Change, People Time Does, and I do like how the end of the album flips the script on the album title, where once you do fix yourself, you can fix the world. There is still hope here. Shame the rest of the album doesn't really seem to agree. So yeah, it's good enough. And this is a band that can write hooks for days. This album's catchy as hell, but I know the Wombats can be great. I wish they'd just get back to that. And finally, from Cordae, From a Bird's Eye View.
I told my niggas up at Coca-Cola for the check that cut me at the Super Bowl. On my life moments is a Super Bowl. My nigga Dr. Dre, he got a Super Bowl. Last night, I was texting Jack Dorsey. That's the perks you get from being super dope.
You know, I remember liking chunks of Cordae's debut album back in 2019 when I reviewed it, where it felt like a decent enough debut, showing a talented rapper where maybe the influences shone through a little too strongly. He needed to take a couple steps to build a distinctive sound and personality, but he was a good rapper. And I'll admit the lukewarm buzz for this gave me the impression that he might not have advanced that much, but I did want to give him a proper chance. And now that I've heard the album, I'm even more conflicted. I think what frustrates me a lot about Cordae is that he might have a high floor, but a low ceiling. He does a lot of things well, and I think there are plenty of solid songs on the album, but few where I feel he excels or goes above and beyond his reflections on success. And that can hurt you when it still feels like his influences are very prominent. In this case, J. Cole being the most, and y'all know my complicated opinions on him. Now, to Cordae's credit, he seems to have a better command of his scope and range than J. Cole does, so he doesn't stick his foot in his mouth nearly as often, and his melodic instincts with hooks and production, they tend to lean a little bit more organic, which makes this album a pretty easy sit, especially as I think he's got good taste in production, like with the bassy balance off the pianos and drums on Jean Michael, thank Raphael Sadiq for that one, or that great horn melody on Today, get rid of the Gunniverse and that song's excellent, or hell, even that sweet guitar hook on Coach Carter. But you can also tell that it feels a little less ambitious, not that he's not trying as an MC, but rarely it feels like he pushed any of his guests to overperform or stretch themselves, or really that he delivered a lot of standout lines. The verses from Lil Wayne and Freddie Gibbs in particular, they're not strong, especially given how scatological Freddie Gibbs can get, but they do feel more distinctive than what Cordae delivers. Hell, Chronicles is probably the best song on the entire album, and you can argue that both her and Lil Durk did more for that song than Cordae did. This is also where I feel the length and the pacing of this album hurts him. It's a breezy but also weirdly abortive listen, to the point where you wonder why he didn't just include the bonus tracks on the original album just to give it a little bit more meat and time, even if that would come with Eminem once again getting in his own way. I heard the songs and no, I didn't care for it. But that might be the root of the problem. For as much as there is a baseline of quality that translates to some good, well-structured songs that I don't think are bland or bad by any means, this is a safe album, where there are a few lines that jump out and very little that helps Cordae stand out in the crowd, and that's fine. I prefer competence to incompetence or a misunderstanding of your strengths, but it kind of feels like a lateral move off a debut album, and I'm not sure how long it's gonna stand out or stick for me, especially in comparison with The Field. It's not bad, again, there's quality, but I'm still hoping for greatness. He might have it, but I'm just not sure. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. I'll say it again. Again, we're still getting through my backlog here. It might take a little bit, but hey, we're on path again, thankfully. But if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, or hey, help out supporting the channel, link to my merch down there below, and link to my Patreon is right over there. If you guys want to just argue outside of the comments and in my Discord, or just help influence my schedule, options available, happy to have you on board. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.